I grew up in a house where my worth was measured not by what I built, but by how well I fit the mold my family had designed. Every glance, every word, every expectation was a test I was destined to fail, or so they thought. To them, ambition was messy, hands that labored were unworthy, and ideas that dared to challenge the status quo were simply inconvenient. I was the one who played in the dirt while they polished crystal glasses. I was the one who sweat under the sun while they lingered in boardrooms pretending control was theirs. For years, I believed their judgment defined me until I realized something profoundly dangerous and liberating. The power they wielded was an illusion, and the true authority had always been in my hands. While they celebrated appearances, I studied reality. While they clung to titles, I learned execution. While they were blind to consequences, I became invisible, calculating, and precise. Every setback, every humiliation, every dismissive word became a lesson, a blueprint for action, a map to mastering the very systems they thought controlled them. And slowly, quietly, I built something they could not see: competence, networks, leverage, influence, real power hidden beneath the surface, away from the eyes of those too comfortable to notice. Tonight, I am not defined by the rooms I once felt excluded from, the eyes that once dismissed me, or the voices that labeled me a failure. I am defined by every choice I've made in silence, by every hand I've lifted to create what others only imagined, and by the clarity that comes from knowing who you truly are when no one is watching. The lessons I carry are dangerous knowledge, the kind that once understood changes the way you see the world, yourself, and the people who think they hold power over you. This is my story of being overlooked, underestimated, and underestimated again, and of rising not through rebellion, not through loud protest, but through quiet mastery, patience, and relentless execution. I'm here to show you what it means to reclaim authority, to step into the space they told you was impossible, and to awaken the power that lies dormant in plain sight. Pay attention, because what you're about to hear is more than a story. It's a lesson in seeing the invisible, commanding the overlooked, and becoming unstoppable. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not the polite hush of a formal dinner, but the kind of silence that presses against your ears, thick and heavy, like a warning you were never meant to hear. I looked down at my hands that night, resting against the pristine white tablecloth. Clean, scrubbed raw, the faint shadows of grease beneath my nails, a jagged scratch across my thumb, hands that had built, that had created, that had fought and labored, working hands. And here they were in the opulent dining room of Georgetown, surrounded by senators, lobbyists, power brokers, like a provocation. At the head of the table, my father held a champagne glass like a scepter. The room fell silent as his voice boomed, praising my brother Tyler, lauding his supposed success, his inheritance of influence and prestige. Applause rippled, polite, restrained, expensive. I clapped too, but mechanically. Then his gaze found me. Not warmth, not recognition, but cold calculation. A piece of silk snagged on a nail. My daughter Alexandra, he said, gesturing vaguely, works in construction manual labor, but we love her anyway, don't we? Laughter rippled, condescending, delicate, sharp. Every eye in the room measured me. I felt the heat of humiliation rise, then recede, leaving a cold, hard clarity in its place. For years I had sought their approval, measured my worth against their standards, worked tirelessly to prove myself. That night, I understood the cost, my dignity. And I realized I was done paying. I didn't storm out, I didn't shout, I didn't react. I simply observed, cataloged, learned, the chandelier, the fresh orchids, the vintage. Bordeaux, it was all a projection, a meticulously constructed illusion funded by a single anonymous source, me. 3 years ago, I had quietly kept the Sterling Foundation afloat, burying transfers through shell accounts so my family would never know. I was saving them, or so I thought. I slipped my hand into my purse, resting it on my phone. Under the tablecloth, invisible to everyone else, I unlocked the screen. 50,000 a month flowing into the foundation, keeping the brownstone alive, funding Tyler's trip, sustaining their illusion. And in that moment, I understood the truth. I hadn't been saving them. I had been paying for my own abuse. I had handed them the whip and thanked them for the privilege. I pressed cancel on the recurring wire transfer, silent, invisible. The room continued its polite murmurs, unaware that the foundation of their carefully curated lives had just been erased. The notification vanished, and with it, my family's invisible leash. My father's scepter of power, his self-assured authority, was now exposed as borrowed, rented, subsidized by the daughter he mocked. I lifted my wineglass slowly, savoring the taste of expensive Bordeaux. It was rich, full-bodied, a luxury they assumed was theirs by right. But I knew differently. Years ago, they had mocked me for playing in the dirt. I had been a manual laborer, living in trailers, sweating under the sun, learning to build things that mattered. They, in their polished suits and glittering soirees, had built illusions of power. They mistook ceremony for influence, privilege for competence. That night, sitting at the head of the table, they still did. But I saw clearly. I saw the hollow veins of their legacy, the invisible wires that tied influence to money, and I realized I controlled every one of them. Every handshake, every toast, every carefully timed smile around the room had been orchestrated by people who had no idea the real power was sitting quietly under the table, in my hands, on my phone. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I didn't need their validation. I had already won. Not by confrontation, not by noise, but by observation, patience, and precision. And now, for the first time, I understood the intoxicating clarity of freedom. My father, David, tapped his glass with a silver spoon, oblivious to the seismic shift beneath his feet. He praised Tyler, the golden child, the supposed heir to influence, smiling as if success could be inherited like a title. Applause rippled through the room, delicate, constrained, as if rehearsed, and I clapped mechanically, my mind elsewhere. The laughter, the murmurs, the polite nods, they were all background noise, because the real event was invisible, inaudible, and yet it resonated with the weight of inevitability. My father had never measured power in terms of capability. He measured it in appearances, in curated networks, in borrowed prestige. I measured it differently. I measured it in what was tangible, actionable, and undeniable. While they obsessed over influence, I built infrastructure. While they sipped wine, I negotiated contracts with municipalities, redesigned city energy grids, and turned ideas into reality. And now, in this gilded room, all that distinction crystallized. The truth could not be ignored. I could see it in their eyes. The subtle shift, the imperceptible panic as the mind's cognitive dissonance kicked in. My hands, scarred and raw, told a story of labor, precision, and creation. My phone had just severed their safety net, and the absurdity of the moment was exquisite. Here was a family convinced they held all the cards, and yet the real authority, the one controlling outcomes, was invisible, silent, and deliberate. I let them stew in it. There is a power in letting the ignorant confront their own irrelevance. For 3 years, I had lived a double life. Austin, Texas, hard hats, dusty job sites, construction boots. D.C., the ignored daughter, the disappointment, the 1W. Ho's existence was an embarrassment at every family gathering, but every transfer I approved, every anonymous payment I made, every silent intervention, it was calculated, not for them, for me. I was building leverage quietly and visibly, like planting seeds in soil no one knew I'd tilled. And tonight the harvest had begun. My father's words cut through the room. She works in construction manual labor, but we love her anyway. The laughter that followed was sharp, condescending, a mockery of dignity. I didn't flinch, I didn't respond. I allowed the moment to crystallize. The irony was exquisite. The hands they mocked had signed checks that kept their illusion alive. The daughter they discounted had been sustaining the empire they believed was theirs. And in that revelation, I found cold clarity. My family had built their empire on borrowed labor, borrowed money, borrowed respect, and I had been the quiet architect of it all. Years of conditioning had taught me to endure, to smile, to suppress outrage, to wait, and now that patience transformed into precision. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was executing. The world had always told me to play small, to accept shame as currency, to hope for fleeting approval, but I had studied the machinery of influence long enough to know that true power does not shout. It moves silently, invisibly, until the outcome is inevitable. And the outcome had just arrived. Then came Jessica, Tyler's fiancée, a figure who, until now, had seemed peripheral. She entered like a bolt of clarity, her voice cutting through the polite oblivion. She looked directly at me, unblinking, aware, terrified, awed. "Do you know who this is?" she asked, pointing at me. "She's not just your daughter. She's the founder, the titan controlling your fate." And in that instant, the invisible became visible. The room shifted, as if gravity had subtly inverted. My father's authority crumbled under the weight of an undeniable truth. I was no longer the overlooked child. I was the force orchestrating their survival, the architect of consequences they could not comprehend. Jessica's eyes locked on mine, and suddenly the room's hierarchy cracked. Every polished suit, every curated smile, every gesture of superiority, they were illusions. They had been playing a game they didn't even know existed, while I had been quietly rewriting the rules. The Nevada solar array, the Texas grid deal, the $410 million valuation, they were invisible forces hidden in plain sight, operating beyond the reach of their expectations. I had been underestimated. For years, and underestimation is a weapon more precise than rage. I watched my father's face shift in real time, the mechanics of cognitive dissonance unfolding like a slow-motion film. His mind couldn't reconcile the daughter he had dismissed with the woman who had just red-flagged a multi-million-dollar deal. My mother's nervous gestures faltered, her polite composure fracturing under the weight of truth. Tyler, the golden child, looked like a man watching his castle collapse from inside the walls. It was mesmerizing to witness. the shock of the elite when their perceived control is stripped away. The irony was exquisite. For years, I had been funding the very empire that scorned me. I had been a silent architect of their privilege, and tonight, the final transaction was complete. My hands, scarred from labor, held more authority than the polished hands holding champagne flutes. I realized then they didn't need my money. They needed my compliance, my subservience, my silence, and I had reclaimed it all. Every expectation they imposed, every insult they delivered was now powerless. I leaned back in my chair, observing the room as if from above. The illusion of control is fragile. It survives only because no one questions the mechanisms supporting it, and when the mechanisms fail, reality hits like a hammer. I had canceled their lifeline, not out of spite, but out of precision. Every subtle emotion, every interaction, every protocol I had followed for years was now revealed to be under my control. And the realization settled in the room like a fog. The overlooked daughter had become the executor of consequence. I could feel their disbelief like heat in the air. My father tried to speak, but the words failed him. Authority, when divorced from competence, is hollow. Tyler opened his mouth and closed it again, realizing that strategy without substance is nothing but sound. My mother clutched her napkin, a gesture of fragile denial. And I was calm, detached. I had watched, waited, and engineered this moment with precision. The foundation had been laid years ago. The bricks were just beginning to shift. Jessica's voice cut through the room, trembling but unwavering. She revealed the board's concern, the stalled deals, and the compliance issues. All eyes turned to me, not my father. Suddenly, the invisible authority became visible. I wasn't just part of the family, I was the controlling force in the room, the one deciding the survival of projects, contracts, and legacies. The irony was palpable. Those who had dismissed me for playing in the dirt now depended on me to keep their empire alive, and yet I did not gloat. I had learned long ago that true power is silent. It does not need acknowledgement. It does not demand applause. It simply exists, shaping outcomes while others remain blind. Tonight was not about revenge. It was about clarity, exposing the machinery of influence, showing them the fragility of inherited power, and demonstrating that competence cannot be faked. Every glance, every murmur, every shocked gasp in that room reinforced a single truth. I was no longer invisible. Halfway through this revelation, I paused, feeling the weight of the transformation, not just mine, but theirs. And now I turn to you, the one listening, the one who seeks knowledge hidden in plain sight. Comment below, twice, the phrase, "I see the truth." Write it, repeat it, say it aloud if you must. Let it settle in your mind. By doing this, you acknowledge the invisible chains that control perception, identity, and power. You lock in awareness, a small ritual that marks your descent into understanding truths most fear to face. Because what we are uncovering together is dangerous, intoxicating, and irreversible. The room had shifted into silence, each person recalibrating their assumptions. My father's aura of invincibility was fractured. Tyler's golden child image was tarnished. My mother's polished composure had melted into uncertainty. Jessica stood across from me, her respect for me clear, though tinged with awe. And I realized with cold clarity that power doesn't need permission. It only needs awareness and action. All the time I had spent waiting for approval was wasted. Approval is irrelevant when you create the rules. I traced the edges of the dinner table with my eyes, memorizing the details of wealth and status that had once intimidated me. Crystal, silver, imported linen, symbols of a life they thought defined them. But objects have no power. Influence has no power without execution. I had spent years building capacity, skills, infrastructure, and networks, and tonight those invisible constructs became tangible authority. The irony? They had been mocking me for labor, for dirt, for effort, while I was quietly orchestrating every lifeline that kept their illusion afloat. Power is often invisible. It hides in ledgers, contracts, intellectual property, and execution. My father had believed that commanding attention equaled commanding reality. He had assumed my hands, scarred and raw, were a liability, but those hands had written checks, negotiated contracts, and built entire energy grids. The cognitive dissonance in the room was intoxicating. They could not process that the one they had dismissed, overlooked, and ridiculed was now the one holding every lever of consequence. I remembered the countless hours in Austin, trailer living, job sites baking under the Texas sun, blueprints read by flashlight, contracts negotiated with men who underestimated me. Every day, every scar, every sleepless night had prepared me for this, and now the culmination of that labor was crystallized in a single moment, their disbelief. My father, who had once dictated the family narrative, was now rendered irrelevant. Tyler, who had absorbed accolades, was paralyzed. My mother, who had managed appearances, could do nothing. I had studied influence and hierarchy as a child, observing how wealth and privilege manipulated perception. But understanding is not enough. Action is the ultimate arbiter. That night, I moved silently, deliberately, executing consequences without fanfare, canceling the transfers, halting the lifeline of their illusion, and allowing Jessica to intervene with precision. It was chess played in real time, invisible to the untrained eye, devastatingly effective. The room had become a laboratory, and I was observing human ego under stress. And then came the realization the family that had dismissed me, the one that had demanded obedience and humility, had been dependent on me all along. The irony is intoxicating. The one who had been treated as a failure, a mistake, was now indispensable. Authority isn't given. It's earned through competence, through execution, and through the ability to act when others cannot. I'd waited, studied, and planned. And now, the results were undeniable, crushing, absolute. The tension in the room became almost physical. Every polite murmur, every suppressed gasp, every hesitant glance was evidence of cognitive collapse. They couldn't reconcile the image of the failure with the woman controlling outcomes that mattered, and I did nothing to help them. I didn't clarify. I didn't explain. I simply observed, letting reality settle like dust on objects they once revered. The illusion of power was gone. T is constructed, maintained, and controlled, and that control is no longer in your hands. Silence. Not a polite hush, but a full stop in the mechanics of expectation. They were unprepared, unarmed, and utterly exposed. For years, I had endured their mockery, their demands, their judgment. Tonight, they endured the precision of truth. I turned my gaze to Tyler, the golden child, the heir, the one who had soaked in privilege without labor, without foresight, without responsibility. His world had collapsed silently and visibly. Contracts stalled, investments frozen, prestige evaporated, all because the foundation of their security, the invisible hand of competence, was no longer in their favor. I had been patient, calculating, and deliberate. I had learned the lesson my father never taught. Power is not inherited. It is exercised. It is enforced. And above all, it is earned. Jessica stepped closer, delivering her report with precision. The compliance issues, the stalled deals, the necessary revisions, all under my authority now. I nodded once, a subtle affirmation. Her eyes met mine, wide with recognition. She understood what the family could not. Success is measured in execution, not approval, in impact, not perception. And in that brief acknowledgement, I realized the ultimate lesson of all this struggle: respect is not granted, it is claimed, and it is maintained through competence, not lineage. I stood slowly, feeling the full gravity of the moment. The polished illusions around me, crystal, silver, linen, finely tailored suits, meant nothing. The true power was invisible, quiet, and irreversible. I had orchestrated, observed, and executed without theatrics. I had built silently a structure of authority and consequence far more formidable than any inherited prestige. My family had believed they held power by proximity to wealth. They'd been wrong. I had held the real power all along. And now they finally knew it. I addressed the room, my voice calm but cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "You have been living in an illusion," I said. "Every accolade you have admired, every influence you assumed, every reputation you held, all of it has depended on unseen labor, and tonight that labor claims its place, not with noise, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with precision, clarity, and inevitability." The silence deepened as if the room itself understood the shift. Power had migrated. Authority had been recalibrated, and I was its architect. As I walked away from the table out the front door, I felt the cool night air on my face. The silence of the street was not empty, it was full of possibility. I had reclaimed autonomy, dignity, and recognition, not from my family, but from reality itself. They would continue their lives, trapped in their illusions, but I was free. Free of expectation, free of approval, free to create, to build, to command on my terms. And that freedom is the most intoxicating, dangerous, and irreversibly transformative force a person can wield. I looked at the city skyline as I ascended to my office in Austin, the sunlight glinting off the steel of the solar arrays I had built. The world they valued, the prestige, the inherited influence, the curated appearances, meant nothing in the face of tangible, executed reality. I had built more than grids. I had built certainty, authority, and unassailable power. And the lesson extends beyond my story. Competence, patience, precision, and silent execution are the ultimate forms of authority. To the one listening now, understand this: the world rewards builders, not pretenders. The world rewards the unseen, the deliberate, the relentless. If you grasp this truth, you will never be powerless again.